What if a woman's true power lay not in everything she said, but precisely in what she chose not to say? What if silence, that seemingly empty space between words, was actually a scream that only attentive men could hear? How many times have you ignored her silence, thinking it was just exhaustion, without realizing it was already the sound of the end? What if I told you that every man, sooner or later, is marked not by a woman's words, but by her definitive absence? We live in an age of noise, of impulsive speech, of endless explanations. But what truly transforms, breaks, and rebuilds is not speech, it is silence. A silence that is not empty, but charged with invisible symbols, with emotional omens, with truths that have been ignored for too long. A woman's silence is like a dark mirror. Whoever dares to look into it sees not her, but himself, naked, without apology. What is it about this silence that is so disturbing? That frightens, that paralyzes, and at the same time, attracts like an ancestral call? You can try to rationalize, argue, or defend yourself. But something inside you will recognize. You've been there before. You've felt the presence of a silence that weighed more heavily than any scream. You've experienced the sensation that she no longer needed words to reach you. And it was at that moment that something broke, within her, or perhaps within you. And that's when the real question begins to ache. What did you fail to hear when there was still sound? But be careful. This video isn't an explanation. It's a layered revelation. Each sentence, a step closer than you were ever taught to perceive. Each symbol, a key to a territory that can only be accessed with psychic courage. Because it's not about her, nor about you. It's about what inhabits the space between you two. The unsaid, the unheard, the unresolved. And if you ignore it now, you'll be repeating a pattern that always takes its toll. Too late. So, if you feel like there's something you need to finally understand, but that no one has ever dared to show you in this depth, subscribe now. This channel doesn't offer easy answers. It forces you to delve into the deepest layers of who you are, and what you've already lost. Because when a woman's voice falls silent, a new kind of language begins. And silence, my dear, never comes by chance. There's an instant, almost imperceptible, when the feminine presence fades without fanfare, and the man only realizes it when he no longer feels the light that once warmed him without his noticing. This moment is undeclared, unannounced. It happens in the invisible realm of the soul, when she silently withdraws her energy from the space between them. And what remains is not the usual emptiness, but a strange, dense echo that fills everything. He feels, though he can't name it, that something essential has gone. And this absence is as vivid as a presence. It is at this point that feminine silence transforms into a force no man can ignore, no matter how much he tries to pretend it didn't happen. Her silence is not passive rhetoric. It is a psychic force that operates between the lines of reality, like a hidden archetype acting beneath the surface. It is the same silence a mother uses to teach without words, that an elderly woman carries in her eyes as she watches the world repeat itself. It is a silence that does not accuse, does not implore, does not demand. It simply settles. And once there is no rational argument that can undo it. The man feels, for the first time, that he has lost something he took for granted. And in this belated recognition lies the deepest wound. He was not left behind, he was forgotten within his own carelessness. By withdrawing emotionally, the woman doesn't just withdraw, she deactivates an entire vibrational field. It is as if she closes an invisible temple, a portal where once there was exchange, warmth, and acceptance. The man, unaccustomed to reading the subtle layers, finds himself faced with an absence that forces him to feel. And in feeling, he begins to remember. He remembers what he ignored, what he silenced in her when she was still trying to make herself heard. Now, there is no longer any sound. There is only the reflection of his own forgetfulness, multiplied by the echo of what she no longer says. And that is when he begins to search, but has nowhere left to knock. Feminine silence is the announcement of an internal choice, to no longer insist where there is no listening. And this decision, made within the spirit, carries a power that no speech could match. When a woman stops trying to be understood, she becomes inaccessible. Not out of malice, but out of emotional survival. And in this wordless withdrawal, she teaches a lesson that will never be forgotten. A woman who remains silent is not at peace. She is in process. And this process, even invisible, changes the emotional field around her. The man feels, without knowing why, that something has broken, and that perhaps there is no turning back. This video is not about strategies or practical answers, it's about recognizing what almost no one has the courage to look at. The exact point where the feminine withdraws, leaving only silence as witness. If you've ever felt this kind of absence, or fear it's approaching, leave a comment with what a woman's silence has taught you. It could be a word, a memory, a feeling. Here, each silent story also has the power to awaken another sleeping soul. The withdrawal of unconditional availability doesn't happen abruptly. It begins with details few men can perceive, a gaze that no longer extends, a presence that once gave itself completely and now slowly withdraws, almost as if testing its own silence. For a long time, this woman was the safe space, the inexhaustible source of listening, affection, and understanding, even when she received little or nothing in return. But there comes a moment when something within her awakens, and then she understands that being always available isn't love. It's dissolution. And in that instant, without warning, she's no longer there, even though she's still there. The man, accustomed to the constancy of affection, feels a difference without being able to name it. He notices that something has slipped through the cracks of everyday life, but believes it's just a phase, some fluctuation. What he doesn't realize is that there's no longer the same abandon in her gestures, that her smiles are shorter, that her responses don't come with the same energy. The woman, who once molded herself to the needs of others, now begins to inhabit her own limits, not out of revenge, but out of an instinct for self-preservation. And this new emotional territory she occupies, where he no longer has free rein, creates an abyss that no masculine word can fill. And then, emptiness sets in. Not the emptiness of physical absence, but the psychic emptiness of no longer having access to that woman's soul. What was once fluid has now become a frontier. What was once shelter is now silence. And, for the first time, he misses not a body, but the energy that filled life with invisible meaning. It's at this moment that many men awaken, too late. They discover that the woman who was always there is no longer there, even if she keeps smiling, even if she still says good morning. Because when she stops being there completely, he feels it, and he never forgets. Silence as a form of self-love is not a gesture of coldness, it is an act of courage. For a long time, a woman tries to be heard through words, explanations, incessant attempts to make herself understood. But there comes a point when she understands. Those who don't listen to what is said clearly will never hear what is shouted in pain. And it is at this point that she chooses silence, not as punishment, but as protection. It is there that she begins to withdraw, not because she has given up on the other, but because she has decided to never give up on herself. She falls silent because she understands that her worth no longer needs to be proven, only felt. This silence, contrary to what many think, is not empty. It is full of presence. It carries layers of maturity, exhaustion, and emotional wisdom. It's a kind of sacred renunciation. She stops fighting for spaces that should naturally be hers. And in doing so, something shifts in the atmosphere. The man feels he's lost access to what has always been there, available, loving, present. But now, that space has been closed from within. There are no doors to be broken down, no hidden keys. Silence is the new language. And this language can only be read by those with the sensitivity to understand that, sometimes, a woman's greatest cry is her absolute silence. The woman who silences herself out of self-love carries an ancient strength. It's a return to her center, to her essence, to the place where she stops trying to save others and finally, saves herself. And it's this strength that shakes the man so profoundly. Because he doesn't just lose her attention, he loses the privilege of being a witness to her soul. And once she withdraws from this role, there's no argument, no promise, no regret that can bring her back to where she was before. Silence, when born of self-love, is definitive. He makes no noise, but he leaves scars that time cannot erase. When a woman falls silent, she does not disappear. She becomes a mirror. An undistorted mirror that reveals to the man everything he avoided facing while she spoke. Her words, previously ignored or underestimated, now echo in the void left by her absence. It is in this silent space that the man begins, for the first time, to listen without distractions. And what he hears are not new accusations. They are the reflections of his own negligence, his emotional absences, his repeated choices that have gradually erased her presence. It is in this confrontation that discomfort arises, for silence offers no escape. In facing her silence, he is not dealing with her, but with himself. Each gesture, every unappreciated emotion, every cold-hearted emotion, now resurfaces without her saying a word. Her silence forces him to deal with the effects of what he himself caused. And this isn't just painful, it's transformative. He feels the weight of what he didn't hear before, but now it's too late for immediate answers. Silence doesn't open a dialogue, it invites reflection, responsibility. And many, when faced with this non-negotiable mirror, collapse, unable to deal with their own reflection when there's no one else to soften it. The woman who remains silent exposes, without words, what she's never been able to say without being interrupted. And this exposure doesn't happen externally, but internally. The man feels a discomfort he doesn't understand, but which haunts him. He longs for a connection he once scorned, for a care he thought eternal, for a presence that now refuses to be reached. And it's in this discomfort that the chance to awaken lies. If he has the courage to face this mirror until the end, he may find not only the woman he lost, but the man he ceased to be. Silence, in this case, is not punishment. It is proof that her love was real, and that he failed to hear it while there was still sound. There are silences that do not pass. They remain, haunting the corridors of male memory like subtle ghosts that never find rest. The woman who fell silent without drama, who walked away without fanfare, leaves behind a psychic imprint that refuses to disappear. The man, even if he moves on, becomes involved with others, starts over, always returns, in thought, in dream, in absence, to the one who left silently. Because it wasn't the end that marked him, it was the way she chose to leave, without explanations, without long goodbyes, only with the certainty of someone who doesn't need to be heard to be remembered. This memory doesn't come through dates, messages, or objects. It manifests itself in the empty spaces of his soul. On silent nights, in moments of involuntary reflection, he encounters that woman who didn't scream, who didn't beg, who didn't humble herself. She simply ceased, and in that cessation, she left the deepest mark she could leave. Because what isn't closed with words remains open within the other, like a book whose last page hasn't been turned. Her absence, contrary to what he imagined, didn't erase the bond, it deepened it. And she became an invisible presence, accompanying him even without permission. A man's emotional memory isn't attached to the words spoken, but to the emotions felt. And no one makes him feel as much as the one who left in silence. He may not confess, he may even deny, but he carries within him the living record of all that was left unsaid. This absence becomes a reference. No other woman can occupy the same space, because no other has withdrawn so completely. Her silence becomes a legacy, not of explicit pain, but of a presence that survives time. And no matter how hard he tries, he will never be able to forget the woman who, instead of asking to stay, taught him the value of her presence, precisely by leaving. When a woman falls silent, something within a man awakens that goes beyond logic. He begins to feel the presence of mystery. The same woman he thought he knew completely suddenly becomes an enigma. Her absence speaks more than her words ever could. Her distance creates a void charged with meaning, as if she had returned to inhabit an ancestral space that no man can access voluntarily. Her silence restores to the relationship what he had lost through excessive predictability, the sacred mystery of the feminine. This new layer of mystery, activated by silence, stirs instincts the man didn't even know he had. He feels the urge to decipher, to understand, to regain what he thought he already possessed. But now, she no longer offers easy access. She doesn't explain herself, doesn't justify herself, doesn't open herself up insistently. And this, paradoxically, attracts him. Because feminine mystery has this power. The less he understands, the more he desires. It is her silence that rekindles in him the realization that she is not possession. She is a living presence, and as such, cannot be controlled. In this new scenario, she ceases to be an extension of his world and becomes a universe of her own. And this disconcerts him. Because instead of pushing him away, her silence makes her more magnetic. He begins to relive memories, to pose questions, to try to recreate the path she once made clear. But now, she walks without leaving a trace. And this absence of answers forces him to delve deeper, not just into her, but into himself. The mystery reborn in feminine silence is not just seduction. It is a call. An invitation to transformation that is only accepted by those who have the courage to cross the darkness without a map. There is a point at which a woman's silence ceases to be merely an the essence of words becomes a limit. an invisible but impenetrable limit. Until that moment, she still offered room, still attempted to build bridges, however fragile. But when she falls silent completely, she isn't just silencing herself, she's establishing boundaries. She's saying with her body, with her gaze, and with her absence, "You're not going any further." This limit isn't imposed as punishment, but erected as protection. Not against the other, but for oneself. And it's in that moment that the man feels, even without rationally understanding, that something has been sealed within her. This silence is non-negotiable. It's not a game, nor an attempt at manipulation. It's the final frontier. The woman who has reached this point has already traversed all hopes, justifications, and concessions within herself. Now, she no longer seeks to be understood. She seeks to be preserved. The man who once moved freely in her emotional world now finds closed doors. And these aren't doors she slammed in anger. They're doors she simply locked with serenity. The serenity of someone who understood that continuing to speak would be to violate themselves. And that silence, however painful, is the only dignified gesture left. For men, this limit is disconcerting. Because it didn't come with fanfare or scenes. It came as a dense, definitive absence. And it is in this silence without return that they realize they are not dealing with a phase, but with a decision. The woman who has reached the limiting silence is not asking for change. She has already withdrawn from the table. And in this new territory, they no longer find access, because silence is now not just absence. It is closure. It is a wall. It is a final point that is not written with words, but with the subtle and irreversible withdrawal of presence. When her silence sets in, something profoundly destabilizing happens in the man's inner universe. He, who so often sought to control the narrative with words, now finds himself faced with a field where his strategies no longer work. Silence does not react, does not explain, does not argue. It simply exists. And in this silent existence, man loses his foothold. He tries to provoke, waits for answers, tests reactions, but nothing comes back. And it is in this vacuum that he begins to lose himself. Because silence, contrary to what he thought, is not absence. It is a firm and unshakable presence that cannot be manipulated. This lack of response generates psychic confusion. The man, accustomed to having emotional control over situations, now finds himself faced with something that does not yield. Her silence is an enigma that cannot be deciphered with logic, only with sensitivity, and sensitivity is something he has neglected for so long that he barely knows where to find it within himself. The absence of words forces him to listen to what he never wanted to hear. His own responsibility, his own excesses, his own emotional fragility. And this, for many, is unbearable. Because there is no way to overcome a silence that refuses to be broken, only respected. The emotional instability that arises in this scenario concerns not only the woman who remains silent, but the man who does not know what to do with the echo she left. He begins to relive scenes, to reinterpret moments, to miss even the conflicts. Because at least in the conflicts, there was sound, there was access. Now, he speaks to the void. And this void has a name: consequence. The woman who remains silent disarms the man not through force, but through absence. And this absence screams louder than any argument could. It is at that moment that he understands, even if he doesn't say it. He has lost the right to listen, because he didn't know how to listen when she was still speaking. In the silence that remains after the words cease, dwells a presence that never fades. It is as if the echo of that absence reverberates eternally in the deep chambers of the being, reminding us that a woman's power lies not in what she utters, but in what she chooses to keep. In this space between the spoken and the unsaid, the invisible takes shape and meaning, challenging the man to look at himself and at what he has truly lost. Not a voice, but a mystery, not a body, but a universe that has vanished into silence. As we contemplate this absence, a question arises that remains suspended, unsettling, and vital. To what extent can we hear what is unspoken? Silence, far from being an end, is an invitation, a passage to a deeper perception, where certainties dissolve and masks fall. It is at this threshold between darkness and light that we are called to awaken to what our hearts already knew, but our minds were reluctant to accept. And it is in this awakening that the possibility of transformation lies, the chance to rebuild connections, to courageously inhabit our own emptiness, and to honor what silence has taught us without words. Just as the last note of a symphony vibrates in the silence of the room, a woman's silence leaves its mark, not as a wound to be healed, but as an eternal whisper that echoes within of the soul. This mark is a call to never again ignore the subtle forces, the truths hidden in the pauses, in the empty spaces, in the restrained gestures. Because in its silence, which seemed like absence, lies an ancient force, capable of forever transforming those who dare to listen to it. And to hear this silence is to begin a path where love, respect, and presence take on new, deeper, more real forms. If you felt this call, this restlessness that silence provokes, don't let it dissipate in the rush of everyday life. Enjoy this video as if making a commitment to yourself, share it to awaken other souls who need to hear this whisper, and subscribe to continue this journey of discovery that transcends words and touches the invisible. We don't provide easy answers here. We offer invitations for you to find yourself amidst the silence and be reborn from what it has left behind. After all, true power lies not in the noise we make, but in the presence we leave when we stop speaking.